Let's talk about the Championship playoffs. Hello guys, welcome back to yet another video. First things first, before we get into this video, head to the comments and comment down below your 1 to 6 predictions for the end of the Championship 23-24 season. Get down there in the comments and share who you think will finish 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th and 6th in the Championship this season, and I can see your opinions on this discussion today. As I say then guys, today's video is on the Championship playoff race. We're going to look at the Championship top 6 and all the teams that might be able to get in there this season, but we're really going to focus on 3rd, 4th, 5th and 6th. Now then, you might be sat there thinking to yourself that we're not going to be talking about the automatic promotion discussion, but we are, because that still involves the playoffs. Not everyone will be able to get into the top 2, so the teams that don't do that will fall back into the playoffs. Before we talk about each of the teams listed beside me, and you can see we've got just from 1st to 20th, I haven't involved the bottom 4. You could even make an argument that I shouldn't be involving teams that are 20th, 19th and 18th, but it is the Championship. There's plenty of new managers, there's plenty of time to go, so we will still give the teams in the bottom half an honourable mention, because they've got to be looking up towards the playoffs this season. They've got to be striving for something in the final part of the season, giving themselves an incentive to go and get results. Before we go into the teams guys, please do make sure to drop a like on this video. We'll go for 550 likes. It would be massively appreciated if you can hit the thumbs up button. If you're not already subscribed, do make sure to hit the subscribe button. It is really appreciated. It takes 2 seconds. It's free to click the subscribe button, so go on, get involved for more EFL Championship content. With all of that said, let's get into the teams working from the top down the table. So then, first of all, we have runaway leaders Leicester City, sat on 65 points here, and remember last season you just needed 69 points to get into the Championship top 6, so Leicester City pretty much have 19 games to get 4 or 5 more points to get over the line this season. Obviously I think they'll do much better than that. Leicester City's current points per game is projecting them to get to 111 points by the end of the season, which would be ridiculous. They've got the most points, the most home points, the most away points, they've scored the most goals, they've got the best goal difference, they've also conceded the least goals. Every stat and metric is in Leicester City's favour, and it's no surprise really when you consider the quality they have got in that squad. Obviously there's been a couple of bumps in the road for Leicester City this season. They've now suffered 4 defeats this season, and their most recent coming at Coventry City last time out in a 3-1 defeat. Next up for Leicester City is a game against Ipswich Town, which is absolutely massive. Remember, Leicester City will be missing Fatawu. They are missing a couple of players to the Africa Cup of Nations, but I don't see a way in which Leicester City don't finish in the top 2. They're 1 to 20 on to finish inside the automatics, and to be honest I think they're going to win the league as well. Next up you come on to Ipswich Town. Now this is where things get interesting. Ipswich are only 7 points behind Leicester, and if they were to go and win at the King Power on Monday night, then they would close the gap to 4 points, and it would feel that everything is getting closer. The teams Ipswich Town have been getting closer to recently are the teams below them. They did have that run of 5 games without a win, and that has seen Southampton and Leeds United close the gap somewhat. Leeds United still 7 points off, so I think that's a pretty healthy gap for Ipswich Town there. The biggest threat for them, in my opinion, at the moment has got to be Southampton, who we will come on to in a minute. Let's give Ipswich Town some credit though. They did go back to winning ways against Sunderland, a 2-1 win with Connor Chaplin's fantastic header there, getting Ipswich Town the 3 points in that one. When you look at what they need to make the top 6 or the top 2 this season, if Ipswich Town churn out 1 point per game from now on in, they will get to 77 points, which would definitely be enough for the top 6. Obviously the position they are in, they've got to be looking up the table, to be honest. They've got to be looking at trying to hold on to that top 2 place. If Ipswich Town can get 35 points in the next 19 games, which works out at about 1.85 points per game, that would get them to 93 points, which in my opinion should be enough this season. I think it's going to be about 93 or 94 points this season to get 2nd place. In previous seasons it's been about 90, but just with the standard these top sides are setting, I think it'll be a little bit above that. There is a chance Ipswich Town will finish in the playoffs this season. In my opinion, I don't think they'll finish any lower than that. The worst case scenario for Ipswich, in my opinion, would probably be 4th place. I mean, even if you look at the gap between them and West Brom, I can't see them falling to 5th. But that said, Ipswich Town, I don't see why they can't get top 2. With games starting to run out and they still sit in 2nd place, they've got the fewest defeats in the Championship this season. Things are looking all right still at Ipswich. The next 3 games include Leicester City, Preston North End and West Bromwich Albion. The Leicester and West Brom ones in particular won't be easy, but even the Preston game is away from home. Ipswich have just got to keep churning out the points where they can. The problem is Ipswich Town could still be really good for the rest of this season, but if Southampton are outstanding, then that will just take them past them, if you see what I mean. We could have a situation here where Ipswich could get to 93 points and it's still not enough for top 2, which would be absolutely heartbreaking for the Ipswich Town fans, but we just have to wait and see. Let's come on to Southampton next then, and Southampton are in ridiculous form. Unbeaten in 20 games in all competitions. They haven't lost since September, which is honestly ridiculous. That is such a good run of form. They've got Adam Armstrong, who's on 14 goals for the season. That said, despite this brilliant form, in the sort of final stages of the season, Southampton still have to go away to Leicester, still have to go away to West Brom, still have to go away to Ipswich, and on the final day, they go away to Leeds United, which really could be a blockbuster game. It really is fascinating right now. Southampton have sort of seized the opportunity while Ipswich Town's form has wobbled. They've just got to hope that Ipswich keep wobbling really to close that gap some more. If Southampton were to churn out 38 points from the next 19, looking at about 2 points per game, that would get them to about 93 points, which, as I say, is probably where a team needs to be to get to that 2nd place this season. As for top 6, Southampton probably only need just about a point per game to get over the line. Even that, they'll probably be a couple points clear. I was looking at it, if they get 0.9 points per game, that should wrap up a top 6 finish. As I say, the battle for 2nd is really interesting, and obviously only one of 2 or 3 teams are going to be able to make it. The teams that don't make it will fall back into the playoffs. Could it be Southampton? Could it be Ipswich? Could it also be Leeds United? Leeds United 4th in the table, 4 points behind Southampton, which is not a million miles away, but 7 points off Ipswich, which still feels like a pretty big gap. The earliest you're going to be able to close a gap that size is, of course, over 3 games, and we're now down to 19 games to go, which still sounds like quite a bit, but when you are in a promotion race, slip-ups don't come up all too often, so Leeds United need to really be consistent. To get top 2 this season, I think they need to churn out about 42 points in the next 19 games, which is going to be about 2.2 points per game. So they really do need to increase those levels. I mean, there's no doubt about it. If Leeds United can have Bamford, Somerville, James, Perot, Ruta all firing, they've got probably one of the best front lines we'll ever see in the Championship. I mean, it is such a good team. And as I've said previously, I did back them to get top 2 at the start of the season, and I still think they might. Unbeaten at home, which is absolutely fantastic, but it's 6 defeats on the road. That said, it was a really comprehensive 3-0 win at Cardiff City last time out. We just need to wait and see with Leeds United. As soon as you think they're starting to make some progress, they have a slip up, and then when they slip up and you think they're out of it, they'll get back on track. So we just need to wait and see. Ultimately, if they can get the gap to Southampton to be 3 points before that final day, then that is massive, because as we say, they host Southampton on the final day. In 5th place, we find West Bromwich Albion, the Baggies. I've really enjoyed West Bromwich Albion this season. I've really found it tricky to not predict them to win when we've done our weekly predictions on the channel this season. They're just a very solid team. The most clean sheets in the division, and they find themselves on 45 points, 5 points clear of 6th and 7th, but they are 6 points behind 4th place Leeds United. As I've said in previous videos, West Brom are just that 5th best team this season. It just seems as if West Bromwich Albion are in their own bubble. Do I think they'll fall out of the top 6 this season? Of course, it's possible, but I don't think they will. Given the points they've already accumulated, we're looking at them probably needing about 27 more points, which would get them to 72, which I think would be enough this season, in 19 games, which is just under 1.5 points per game. So really definitely possible for West Bromwich Albion to maintain top 6 levels. As I say, they've been really solid at the back, but of course you need to give an honourable mention to Thomas Asante, who's up to 10 goals for the season now. And we also need to mention that they've brought in Weimann. That could be an interesting signing. As I say, I think what I've liked about West Brom this season is the manager and the way he goes about things. Corberan really did catch my eye when he was at Huddersfield, especially in that promotion chasing season. So yeah, West Bromwich Albion, I don't see a lot of movement from them. Do I see them making the top 2? Not really. They're 13 points behind. A lot would have to go wrong for the 3 teams in front of them. Do I see them falling outside of the top 6? No, I don't think that'll happen either. I genuinely just think West Bromwich Albion are quite comfortable in there. And it's going to be interesting when we get to the latter stages of the season. If they're still in 5th place and they've kind of wrapped up their place early, maybe that means West Bromwich Albion can get their sort of preparations for the playoffs early, if that makes sense, knowing that they're going to be there. But as I say, they need to get there first, but the way they are going about it, I think they will. The Baggies have looked solid. In 6th place, we come on to the mighty Sky Blues. Coventry City occupy a Championship playoff place for the first time since the end of last season. And as I said in a previous video a couple of weeks ago, this was actually my top 6 that I predicted. Now, there's still a long way to go and a lot could change, but Coventry City's form has been absolutely fantastic and has been pointing towards Coventry moving towards the playoffs. The tricky thing is now, can we maintain it? Because Coventry City timed things absolutely perfectly last season. We got into the top 6 with about 2 games to go and the games just simply ran out and we stayed there. That's not me saying we didn't deserve it. We did in the end, but we left it late. As for this season, Coventry City have got themselves into the top 6, but look at the traffic behind the Sky Blues. We sit in 6th place at the moment, but we could find ourselves after the next match week 12th or 13th. That's just how tight it is in the Championship table. Coventry City probably need to churn out about 32 points in the next 19 games, so about 1.7 points per game. As I say, that takes you to 72 points, which I think is a comfortable amount to get into the playoffs this season, given it was about 69 points last season, but that was one of the lowest we've seen in recent Championship seasons. Coventry City have just the 1 defeat in the last 13 games and no fixtures against a top 6 side over the next 7 games, so a favourable run in, but it could work against Coventry. Ultimately, as I say, Coventry City, it has been a gelling process, as much as it's annoyed me to say that, and we have had to tweak things, especially the back 4, which I'm very happy with and seems like Coventry City are very settled with now. The fans are buying into it. Mark Robins, as I say, has got that continuity. Can we stay there? The goal difference is really healthy as well. We just need to keep building on things. The way I'm looking at it as a Coventry fan right now is we need to try and pull West Brom below us, because we are the sitting duck in 6th place. Everyone just outside the playoffs will be looking at Coventry and hoping they trip up every week. So we've got to keep those consistency levels, and if we can catch West Brom and pull them in, that would be great as well. But right now, Coventry looking fantastic. In 7th place, we find Sunderland. Now, Sunderland are level on points with Coventry. It's just the 5 goal difference gap which has got Sunderland outside of the Championship top 6. They've been a solid team this year and I still think they can make the top 6, but it just seems there's a little bit of restlessness now with Michael Beale. Quite a few fans calling for his head. They've been maybe just a bit inconsistent under Beale, but it's not a massive sample size. I can't really go into too much detail about what we've seen from Beale so far, because they've had a couple of decent results, but not many results, if that makes sense. They've still not even played 10 games under Beale yet. As things stand right now, I do think Sunderland will be in the discussion. They're at least going to be in the top 8 for me, and I don't see why they can't be pushing for top 6 at the end of the season. Jack Clarke has got 13 goals this season, which is fantastic. But the interesting thing I found when I was looking at Sunderland's top scorers for the season, after Jack Clarke with the 13 goals, the next top goal scorer is Bellingham with just 4 goals. So they do need a couple more players to chip in with more goals regularly, and maybe, just maybe, they might be able to sneak into the top 6 like they did last season. In 8th place we find Watford. Watford have jumped into that top 8 now, 1 point outside the top 6 after their win against Queen's Park Rangers on Sunday. As I say, it's just so tight, and they're only 1 point behind Sunderland and Coventry. They've got the same goal difference as Sunderland as well. I wouldn't be surprised if when we get to the final game week of the season, there's about 10 teams trying to get into the playoffs. It really could be that cagey. When we look at Watford, I have said previously that they've been a little bit inconsistent, but maybe not so much recently, with just 2 defeats in their last 11 games in all competitions, which isn't too bad, but they haven't had a single clean sheet since the 11th of November, so just need to tighten things up at the back. But when it comes to going forwards, they're certainly doing something right. Watford, they're right in the mix, just as they were last season. In 9th place we find Hull City. Hull City are an interesting one. I've stated before they're a bit of a dark horse this season, and to be honest, if my team Coventry weren't in the discussion, I feel like Hull would be a team I would be rooting for somewhat, because it's nice to see this club back on its feet after going down to League One and the problems they've had with certain managers and the owners and whatnot, and certainly feel like they're pushing in the right direction. I certainly do like Rosinia. That said, they've had a good start to the season, but it is now 4 defeats in the last 5 games. They are competitive. They're not exactly getting battered every week, but just falling short in certain departments. They have obviously lost a couple of key players through this season to injuries. When it comes to Hull City's next 5 games, it's a real opportunity to get back on track. They face Sunderland, and then the next 4 games after that are all against teams in the bottom half of the Championship. So if they can get something against Sunderland and then maybe win 3 of the 4 games after that, they might find themselves back in the Championship top 6. I still think, despite the wobbling form, Hull City are a team you have to keep your eye on this season. In 10th place we find Middlesbrough. After just a couple of weeks ago it felt like Middlesbrough were falling away from the top 6 race. A great couple results, especially that 3-1 win against Millwall, and they are up to 10th place, just 1 point outside that top 6. I think if Middlesbrough get 33 points from the next 19 games, which is about 1.8 points per game, that would probably be enough to get Middlesbrough into the top 6 at the end of the season. They have played 11 games in the last 35 days, which is worth pointing out. I mean, because of the FA Cup game and the couple of Carabao Cup games they've had in there, they've had one of the busiest schedules out of any team across the English football pyramid over December and January. They are suffering with injuries, which is a recurring problem. That said, they're still capable of picking up some really decent results, and I am really fascinated to see how they get on in the Carabao Cup game against Chelsea. It'd be great to see them get to the final. 15 different goal scorers they've had this season, which is quite an interesting stat. Middlesbrough, they're right in the discussion as they were last season, in my opinion. After Middlesbrough, you find Norwich City in 11th place. Norwich, despite being in the middle of the table, are just 2 points outside of that Championship top 6. It just goes to show how crazy it has been this season, how tight it is, how little there is to separate these teams. Norwich City have been a pretty interesting team to watch at times this season, not just on the pitch, but watching some of their fans' reactions off the pitch as well, because it feels as if Norwich City are only always 1 game away from their fans being like, right, that's it, season's finished, because it's so tight. If they lose 1 game, they might drop into 13th and they're in the bottom half. If they win their game the next week, they're into the top 10 and playoffs are back on. So it's been really fascinating to watch. Obviously, the expectations are for Norwich to, get in that top 6. They didn't do it last season. They want to put it right this season. But I've got to be honest, I'm not 100% sure. I wouldn't say I'm totally convinced, but at the same time, it wouldn't surprise me if they get in there, if you see what I mean. Jonathan Rowe has been absolutely fantastic this season. His goal in the game against Hull City was fantastic. It takes him up to 12 goals for the season now. The next 3 games for Norwich really could define their season. West Bromwich Albion, Leeds United and Coventry City, all of those 3 are in the top 6. Norwich City, let's just see where they are in a couple more games, but I wouldn't be surprised if they keep doing that all the way until the end of the season. Preston North End are back into the Championship top half after a 2-0 win against Bristol City, a much needed result. They've struggled for goals, to be honest, recently. As we've said, the fantastic start to the season has stood them in good stead, that they've been allowed a wobble a 2-0 win against Bristol City, and they're back to just being 2 points off that top 6. They could still make it this season. That said, looking at the goal difference just makes me really puzzled by Preston North End. They've struggled for goals, and they've also struggled for clean sheets. That result against Bristol City was Preston's first clean sheet in 9 games. That said though, like I say, Preston find themselves 2 points off the top 6. If the bar for the playoffs is to be 70 points, I don't see why Preston can't give it a go. That would mean 32 points from the next 19 games, which, who knows, it's not impossible for Preston. If you're a Preston North End fan, do share your thoughts. It seems as if 1 minute you're out of it, the next minute you're back in it. Right then, that wraps up the top half. Let's still go through the teams in the bottom half of the Championship table. 13th place you find Cardiff City, only 3 points off the playoffs. They're in the bottom half and they're 3 points off the playoffs, which once again just goes to show how crazy it is this season. No clean sheets in their last 8 games is a concern for Cardiff City, and 1 point in their last 4 home games is also a concern. But once again, a bit like with Preston, they had a good start, and it always feels as if Cardiff City are just 1 win away from being right back in the mix, so I wouldn't rule Cardiff out of it. In 14th place we find Bristol City, 4 points off the Championship top 6, not a million miles away to be honest. They have just brought in Gardner Hickman and Twine, which I do think are quite interesting signings to be honest. The form recently has been a little bit wonky. They had 3 wins in a row before a 0-0 draw and then back-to-back defeats without scoring now in 3 games, which is not a great return. The next 6 games for Bristol City include West Ham in the FA Cup replay, then Watford, Coventry, Leeds, Borough and Southampton. That is a pretty tricky run for Bristol City, but if you want to be a team in the top 6 discussion, you need to beat the teams that are also going to be in that discussion. Bristol City, once again, as I say, not a million miles away from it. If they can churn out 1.9 points per game from here on in, that will get them past 70 points and probably a top 6 finish, but we will see. After Bristol City there is a 3-point drop down to 15th place Swansea City. Swansea City are on 33 points. They have brought in a new manager, so once again we'll just give him that bit of time. Obviously frustrations for Swansea City in the last game, conceding in the 94th minute with Birmingham City's equaliser there. Now Swansea fans probably know how it feels to be a Coventry fan after what they did to us a few weeks ago. Swansea's form isn't too bad to be honest, only 2 defeats in their last 10 games in all competitions, which is quite good considering they've not really had a permanent manager in that time. So if they can be, you know, pretty consistent over the next few games, they might find themselves back in the conversation. They find themselves 7 points off the top 6 right now. The next 3 games for Swansea are Southampton, Bournemouth in the FA Cup and then Leicester City. All 3 of those, of course, very tricky. After Swansea City, you find Millwall on 32 points, 8 points off that Championship top 6. We're looking at them probably needing to get 2 points per game from here on in to make the top 6, possibly more than that. So they've left themselves a lot of hard work to do if they still want to make the top 6. Not impossible though. We all know what the Championship is like. One of the concerns I've highlighted here for Millwall is their top scorer this season is on 5 goals. So there's no one really driving them forwards with quite a few goals consistently. They're a good away team, which is something we've mentioned. The next 2 games for Millwall are Queen's Park Rangers away and Preston North End at home. If Millwall can find themselves getting back-to-back wins there, that will obviously lift them up to 38 points and maybe close the gap somewhat on that top 6. If you're a Millwall fan, do you still think it's possible, or do you think you've left yourself too much hard work to do it this season? Level with Millwall, we find Stoke City. Stoke City, as I say, the same applies for them that I said for Millwall. Probably need to get just about above 2 points per game from here on in, so it's going to be very tricky. That said, Stoke City's form is not bad. It's 7 games unbeaten in the league and only conceded 5 goals in 8 games, which is a really decent return for their defence. The next 2 games for Stoke City are Birmingham City and Sunderland. Some interesting matchups there. Can the Potters close the gap on the top 6? We'll see. Blackburn Rovers are another team on 32 points. Once again, that means they're 8 points away from the top 6. Probably need to get 40 points in the final 19 games could be very tricky. Blackburn are a team in previous seasons that have been very close to the playoffs. In fact, last season they missed out narrowly on the final day. The problem though for Blackburn Rovers this season is just they've not been very consistent and they've not actually been very good. They've lost the same amount of games as Rotherham United, who are bottom of the table. That said, they've won, quite a few. They just don't draw many, do they? It's just one win in the last 9 league games for Blackburn, which is not good whatsoever. Having looked at Blackburn's next 10 games, 9 of their fixtures are against bottom half teams. So they've really got to make some progress now, because it does look as if the final sort of 9 or 10 games will probably be tricky fixtures, which if Blackburn haven't made much progress over the next few games, they might find themselves looking over their shoulder rather than looking up the table in the final stretch of the season. But we shall see. They've got Smodix, who is obviously the top goal scorer this season, so they've always got some hope there. The final 2 teams we're going to come on to are Plymouth Argyle first, who find themselves 10 points off the top 6. Not impossible they could make it this season. They'd have to be so good from here on in. They'd probably need to get on average 2.2 points per game to make the playoffs, but let's be honest, Plymouth staying up is the main objective this season. I do think they will stay up. They have brought in a new manager, which means, let's just see where they are after a couple of games. They picked up a 1-1 away at Huddersfield last time. If they improve on the road, in my opinion, there's no doubt about it, they could still get top half this season. To get top 6, they'd have to be very good. 4 of their next 6 games are at home though, so a real opportunity for Plymouth to pick up a big sort of splurge of points over the next few games. And once you get to 40 points, you're probably not looking over your shoulder so much. You can maybe start thinking, where can we finish this season? How many more places can we climb? The final team we're going to mention are Birmingham City. Birmingham, to make the Championship playoffs, would have to be very, very good. Probably need to churn out about 2.3 points per game. But let's just give them a mention in the discussion anyway, because they have brought in a new manager in Tony Mowbray. And you think to yourself, if they'd not had Wayne Rooney, where would they be? Because obviously John Eustace had them in 6th place before he was replaced. Tony Mowbray picked up a decent 2-2 draw for the Blues at home to Swansea City in the last game. The next couple games for Birmingham are Stoke City away and Middlesbrough at home. If Birmingham can, get themselves away from the bottom 3 over the next few games, then maybe they can have a look at the top half. But top 6 might be a stretch, but we'll just mention them anyway because it's the Championship. So then there you go, guys. That wraps up today's video. As I say, the teams obviously lower down the table have a lesser chance of making it, but it's the Championship. Anything can happen, and it really is congested in the middle that if a lot of teams struggle to be consistent, someone could come from nowhere to make it this season, which is something that has happened in previous seasons. Like I say, guys, do share your predictions down in the comments for who you think will make the Championship top 6. Share your 1 to 6 down in the comments. While you're there, please do make sure you did drop a like. Make sure you've subscribed as well, and I will see you in the next video. Peace out.